The battles in JoJo might be some of the most interesting fights in a Weekly Jump series, and this is all thanks to the puzzle room design that Araki had committed to in order to imitate the rules of his favorite series, Babel 2. And because of this, some of the more interesting fights in JoJo tend to be the less direct confrontational ones, and more so when two characters use their abilities to make big wagers on tests of skill, be it gambling, video games, or even catch, though probably the best example of this comes from Part 8 JoJolion, when Beetles battle brutally on behalf of their bipedal benefactors, or as I like to call it, Beetle tendency.
Open the game!
So Beetle Tendency, or more accurately, Every Day is a Summer Vacation, is a story arc in JoJolion that lasts from chapter 34 to 38, and acts as both an introductory arc for the eldest son of the Higashikata family, that being Jobin, but also the continuation of the main story of JoJolion hinges on the outcome of a stand battle between him and Gappy. Though this is no ordinary conflict, instead, both parties are subtly using their stands to cheat at a traditional Japanese beetle fight. All the while, Josuke is trying to poke and prod information as he plays, while still making this fight come off as just a friendly back and forth. And like with most other game-based fights in JoJo, the best part is seeing the unique ways the characters either use or don't use sleight of stand, a term I created when a stand user tries to hide his stand usage from another. But before we get too into that, let's discuss the game that they are playing and the reason why Araki would likely pick it, just so that we can appreciate the writing of the fight just a little bit more. So in this fight, the surrogate battlefield is that of traditional beetle fighting, and beetle fighting, or bug fighting, is actually a pretty prominent gambling circle in the Asian parts of the world, with many different species of insect taking the spotlight, though beetle fighting in specific stems mostly from Japan and their iconic Japanese rhinoceros beetle, though other beetles would become a prominent part of the sport as well. Now, the practice originated as a hobby, usually picked up by kids during the summer, called bug collecting, which is pretty self-explanatory, though soon enough kids would start making their more aggressive or territorial bugs fight each other, and thanks to the defense mechanisms of beetles being relatively harmless, the Japanese beetle became the dominant one in its field, as they could fight each other in entertaining ways and not do too much lasting damage to each other outside of ramming into each other and knocking each other off a log. Along with this, rules for the sport would soon be made, and the practice would become a relatively normal affair even up into the modern age. Eventually, it went on to inspire tons of media franchises as well, like the famous story on the origin of Pokemon, or more importantly, Metabots. Though, due to the hibernation period and lifespan of the beetles used in the sport, along with the free time required to go out and bug collect, the whole sport itself is somewhat tied to childish youth and summertime in Japan. Hence the name of the arc being Every Day is a Summer Vacation, and it has a focus on beetles specifically. Though the title itself is also very symbolic and plays into Jobin himself, as he is immature or a man-child-like character, someone who is constantly living every day like it's a summer vacation. Be it in his introduction where he ends up quoting someone else to appear cool, or in how he buys weird, nonsensical gifts for people who have no use for them in a childish attempt to flaunt his money. And then of course you have that Jobin's room is lined with toys and many different expensive bugs from his collection. It becomes very clear that Jobin is someone who puts up a guise based on his artificial pride that stems from his wealth. And this is reinforced in how easily Josuke is able to lure Jobin into a competition, all by simply challenging that pride, with Jobin not even figuring out exactly what was going on until after he was already defeated. And that's what's so beloved about this fight, the level of mind games that go into everything involved, such as Josuke steering the conversation in a way that gets Jobin to agree to betting on these matches. As the first round of Beetle Tendency is done so Josuke can test the waters on Jobin, essentially he wants to give him a taste of defeat so that he can grow a hunger for victory within Jobin that will drive him deeper into Josuke's hustle. Thus, the two of them make a friendly wager, this being an eyebrow that they will shave if their beetle were to lose the fight, which is actually a pretty common bet among teens. Then the two of them would mark their beetles with stickers, one with a star for Josuke's and a Higashikata family crest for Jobin, and they would begin their beetle battle. Though right before the fight would begin, Jobin would demonstrate to Josuke the power of his Palawanikas by putting it up against a giant hornet, and this beetle would cleave right through that hornet with ease. And following that, Josuke would soon find out that this challenge would be much more than he originally expected, as Jobin's obsessive nature has made him an expert in the field, so much so that when Josuke and him are both using the same breed of stag beetle, Jobin's stag beetle is in a much better place for the battle, since he had been filing down its mandibles so that they could become deadly cutting tools for the insect, which ironically was the actual reason Josuke had picked a fight with that beetle in specific, seeing its thinner looking horns as a weakness, though in practice he saw the error of this line of thinking. Though using his knowledge and his stand, Josuke was able to bounce back thanks to the intelligence of his beetle, as he was able to store some female pheromones on the end of his brush, but he was also able to use soft and wet to plunder this smell and distribute it around the ring in the form of tiny bubbles that he could pop at will in order to dope up his beetle when he needed to, helping it lift its competition into the air, forcing it to flee, resulting in Josuke's total victory of the first round. Though even after losing and shaving his eyebrow, Jobin isn't upset. The whole first round had given him the rush that he had longed for, the excitement of the gamble, and this defeat fueled him for the second round, causing him to coax Josuke into a second round as well. Though this time around, Jobin seemed deadly serious, as he asked Josuke what he wanted in the second round's wager, and Josuke brings up his golden Lamborghini. He accommodated to this demand and then asked Joshu, who has been a passive observer throughout this whole arc, to root for Josuke this time around, because Jobin likes to feel like he's up against the ropes, feeling as if he's the underdog, which again shows Jobin's childish personality, because if you look at his life, he is anything but an underdog. Though that is only half of the bet. Josuke would need to wager something as well, and as a sort of twist on the standard betting element of this arc, usually it's the enemy asking the protagonist to offer up something of equal value. Instead, Jobin simply asks Josuke to allow him to lick his eyeball, which sounds super strange, but could in fact be Araki referencing a weird trend that was spreading around Japan like wildfire around the time that this arc was being written, where young adults would engage in eye licking as a shocking sexual act of intimacy. Now beyond just that, a cool thing to note is that in this second battle, Jobin would begin to fully use his stand as well, just like Josuke. And in the future of JoJolion, when Jobin would use his stand on people, he tends to aim for or around the eye with his ability, which might be merely a coincidence, or maybe Jobin was planning something far more cruel for Josuke if he won. And speaking of cruel, the next round of the beetle fight would begin, and Jobin would place a much smaller beetle into the mix, this being the Rosenbergi stag beetle. Though don't underestimate its size, as the Rosenbergi's lower position allowed it to utterly trounce the Paliwanicus, cutting up its body piece by piece until Josuke's stag beetle was on the ropes. And this is around the time that Josuke would notice that he isn't the only one cheating using his stand, as Jobin's Rosenbergi has a white liquid oozing out of its head, though soon the first round would reach its time limit and end in a draw, allowing both beetles to recover and prepare for a second round. And in this downtime, Josuke would ask about the white ooze, and Jobin would reveal that he had drilled a hole into the head of his Rosenbergi and filled the cavity with wax. This way he could imitate the effect of a fungal parasite that targets the brains of insects and controls them, though Jobin doesn't reveal how he's doing so. Then the second and final round of this contest would start, and the Rosenbergi would begin with its terrifying offensive capabilities, completely decimating Josuke's Paliwanicus. And it's here that Josuke would uncover what's going on. Using his soft and wet, he sees that Jobin's brush is unnaturally hot at its bristles, quickly deducing this is the work of his stand, Speed King, as Jobin uses his ability on his brush's bristles to melt the wax on the Rosenbergi's head, allowing him to essentially remote control the bug. Thus, Josuke needs to come up with a plan fast, or he would if he hadn't already stacked the deck during the intermission. As in a moment that looked like panic from Josuke, he reached for Jobin's brush, though this was merely deception in order for him to plant soap bubbles containing venom from the hornet that Jobin's Paliwanicus had sliced and diced up earlier inside Jobin's brush. This way, when he would clean his Rosenbergi during their downtime, he would inadvertently poison his gladiator. Along with this, the more he would use his ability on his Rosenberg, the more he'd be poisoning it as well. And mixing together bubbling hot wax didn't help either, resulting in the Rosenberg to begin to seize out of control and lose its advantage in the fight, and then of course bursting when tackled by Josuke's Paliwanicus, resulting in Gappy claiming both victory and the keys to Jobin's golden Lambo, and ending the arc. And honestly, I have to say, this arc has everything. It has a great character establishment for Jobin and his stand, along with fun stand usage, and the fight itself being as much a game of wits as it was a stand battle. And of course, like any good sports entertainment event, live commentary is a necessity, and we see a lot of it from Joshu, who makes reading this chapter an utter delight. And honestly, the irony of Jobin orchestrating his own defeat in his attempt to showboat early on perfectly capstones this fight and this arc, as not only did he do this when he cut the Hornet in half, but this arc wouldn't have begun if he didn't give Josuke the Paliwanicus at the beginning of it. And this orchestrating his own destruction is a great microcosm of the character that Jobin would become later down the line. And honestly, Every Day is a Summer Vacation is one of the best character introduction arcs that I have seen from JoJo. So it doesn't surprise me that it's a fan favorite, and I'm glad that I was able to talk about it, and hopefully I helped you appreciate it just a little bit more. And with that all said and done, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you want to help support more videos like it in the future, I have a Patreon at patreon.com/MediNotTheBadGuy. And if you want to find something that is just as fun as watching Beetles fight, well, you can do so by buying a copy of Shimoneta, A Boring World Where the Concept of Dirty Jokes Doesn't Exist at buyshimoneta.com.